5 of the most disappointing albums for 2018. As every year, there are amazing albums, there are shite albums, but you know what? There is the ones in between that you have expectations for and they just let you down. Now, I would say 2017 probably hit me with more disappointments overall than 2018, but 2018 had bigger disappointments within the individual albums, I would say. So last year there were a lot of albums that disappointed me, but I think there were a few this year that hit a bit harder than the ones last year, but I will get into them because that's the point of the list. Hope you enjoyed this list. Do comment what disappointed you, because I'm sure there are always albums for everyone that disappoints people. I mean, it's all depending on your expectations and what you feel about the album going into it and how you feel about the album afterwards, because you know, it could be still a decent album, but maybe your expectations were just a little bit higher. Quick honorable mention, or dishonorable mention I guess you could call it, to Kanye West's Ye. I mean, look, I've not been the biggest fan of Kanye West this decade. Honestly, I think a lot of people love Yeezus and love The Life of Pablo, even Kids See Ghosts quite a bit more than I do. But I just didn't think he would sink so low with an album like Ye. Like, the fact that people were praising this so much upon release is so baffling to me. Like, this is easily his worst album, and it only kind of shows how big his stardom is at this point. Like, he can basically, you know, half-ass 7 tracks and people still call it like a great release. I do not see it all. This album was a huge letdown, and Kanye really could be doing a lot better than this. But now for the actual list. I'm going to count these down actually from 5 to 1. And I'm going to start with one that probably didn't really gain that much attention for a lot of people, but I'm quite a fan of this artist. Jason Eady with I Travel On. Now, the thing is that country music for a lot of people, even people that watch me on this channel, isn't really that big of a deal. I get that some people just don't really care for the genre at all. But I always try and point people to the greater artists in the genre that will hopefully sway people's opinions, especially artists like Courtney Marie Andrews, Jason Eady including as well, the Southern Family compilation last year, from 2016. Sturgill Simpson, a lot of good artists, and as I said, Jason Eady too. And last year he put out a great album that had so many great lyrical themes, like the concepts where he tackles religion and so many other things within his personal life. It was just such an introspective release and one of the better written albums to be released in the country genre of the year. I mean, I don't think there were that many last year that I cared that much about, but Jason Eady definitely stepped up the game. But this follow-up to that just had nothing remotely interesting. I couldn't even tell you a single song from this album. Like, honestly, it really had nothing to it. Like, the instrumentals were almost nothingness. Like, there was just nothing to the guitar tones. I just got nothing from it all. And he's still a great songwriter too. Like, I can't take that away from him, but to go from a great album to something I couldn't even recall is a bit of a huge step down. So yeah, this is definitely a letdown for me for 2018. Number 4 on the list is an album I probably praised the most from this list. I did give it a positive review. I did give it a positive score back when it came out, but honestly, the more I think about this album, the less I've even bothered returning to it. Most of the songs I've kind of just left behind me now, which is a real shame. And that is Denzel Curry's Taboo. Honestly, it's a good album. Maybe not a 7 out of 10, probably in retrospect it's a 6 out of 10 really, because again, I can only say I returned to Perks and the track with JPEG Mafia, which I'm completely forgetting the name of right now. There are great songs in the track list here, but as an album, you know, completely flowing from start to finish, just was a bit all over the place. Like, he did some pretty good vocal performances, surprisingly, especially on the first few tracks, and I did like how it was all split into different acts, each act considerably different than the last, and by the end of the album it essentially just went into the darkest side of Taboo that he was referencing right at the beginning. It was actually pretty cool for a concept, but musically, so many of these tracks I can't really say have that much resonance with me. Honestly, I think this artist, Denzel Curry, has so much potential that he's just not quite reaching, and I don't know what it is that it is missing, but something is just not hitting hard enough for me with his music. I think Imperial was a very different album, but the thing with that album was that it was just straight up banger after banger, and I think it worked way better. But now, artistically, he's definitely progressed into a new territory that not many artists are working with whatsoever, but I just feel like it hasn't been quite honed in just yet. Basically, I just don't know what I want from him at this point, but I'm still feeling a disconnect somewhere. Like, the ideas he's got and the music and the execution, it's just slightly off, but he's on the right path to putting out something great for sure. It's a real shame though, because I have been rooting for him from the start. Like, especially with Imperial, sorry, I was really championing that album back in 2016. I still think it's one of the better hip-hop releases of that year, but he's just kind of gone quite overlooked for quite a bit of time, and Taboo has definitely elevated him to way more success, but I just don't think it's the album that's defining his sound, but we'll see where he goes. But yeah, this one is just a bit of a letdown. Number 3 on the list is another hip-hop release coming from CZARFACE, and not only just CZARFACE, but a collaboration between CZARFACE and MF Doom. In theory and concept, just by saying those two artists in the same sentence, to me, is like, this should have been hip-hop album of the year. Like, seriously. These two artists were made to collaborate, and they have done in the past before this album, but an entire album of these two artists together, it should have been amazing. MF Doom's had loads of influence on the rap game, and honestly, his comic book villain style has impacted a lot of other rappers, including the hip-hop group CZARFACE, which are clearly influenced by his work, and their 2015 album was certainly an album that really was a highlight of the year for me especially. I feel as though it needs more attention, to be honest, because Every Hero Needs a Villain is such a great album, but again, like I said, that MF Doom influence is clear, so you would think a few years later these two artists coming together would have just been perfect, but this was just a huge letdown. A couple of great tracks on here, some bangers I really enjoyed, but MF Doom was just kind of coasting by. Like, he was not on his A game whatsoever, and even the instrumentals for the most part were kind of okay at best. It just ended up being a pretty forgettable release. It should have been in talks for Hip Hop Album of the Year, but instead it's just going to be left behind in 2018 as a moment where people really just felt very let down, and it's a shame because I like a lot of these combinations that come together in hip hop like this. You know, there's always a collaborative hip hop release every year, and this was one that sounded amazing, and it just never ended up being that way. Number 2, probably going to be the most controversial pick for this list. Dirty Computer by Janelle Monáe. Look, the thing is that I did try going back to this album a few times once I'd reviewed it, because I noticed that the critical acclaim was only piling on and on and on and on after I'd reviewed it. So I was like, holy shit, was I just completely wrong about this or something? Multiple critics that I highly respect on YouTube and in the music publication world were just throwing the praise onto this one, giving it high scores, calling it one of the best releases of the year. So I was like, okay, you know, let's just try it again, and then try it again later on in the year and see if I was wrong. And I mean, you can't really be wrong about an opinion. They're not wrong and I'm not wrong, but I just don't see where the hype came from for this. Seriously, in theory, this could have been a lot better than it turned out to be, but the concept and the themes that Janelle Monáe tackled were incredibly flaccid, honestly. Like, you could do something great with the feminism themes that she was tackling, the attacking of American culture and America's way of dealing with things. Like, all of that was there, but it just felt very limp. Sure, there is a bit to read into when you do read the lyrics on this album, and there are some great ideas being thrown around, and there are some great points being made, but man, does this just not hit hard at all. And the whole computer concept as well that she was talking about going into this album, I just don't think it was executed well at all. Like, I know some people were saying, oh well, I don't listen to the album for the concept, but that kind of proves that the concept's weak in itself, because if you don't even notice the concept while you're listening to this album, then the concept failed, didn't it? And regardless of the concept anyway, perhaps I'm going a bit too much into that, but the songs themselves, I really found kind of 80s worshipping cheesiness, a lot of Prince idolship going on. It worked for Make Me Feel, because I would still say it's one of the best songs of the year, absolutely, but then you have tracks like America, which is just such a straight up like riff for riff of Let's Go Crazy by Prince. Your influence was on your sleeve, but try and at least put your own spin on it, because it's not really not really the most original sound, to be honest. Same with other tracks like Dirty Classic Life, just felt very, very 80s kind of stuff that I just didn't really feel like I was all that attached to. A lot of great songs on here, don't get me wrong. I mean, I still really like tracks like Screwed and a few others on the album too that really did work. Django Jane grew on me quite a lot as well. I think she pulled off that style really well, but that was just kind of secondary to all the other tracks that didn't really hit hard for me. And The Archandroid is really going to be one of my favourite albums of the decade, so to go from that to an album that I don't really regard all that good, it's just a huge disappointment to me, so that's why this album is on the list. Now, finally, we're going to get to number one. I feel as though anyone who's been watching me for quite some time will probably be able to guess what's my number one, honestly. Didn't really keep it a secret that this album hugely let me down, and that is Anderson .Paak's Oxnard. Now, granted, perhaps my expectations going into this, and many people's expectations going into this, were what dragged it down, like, hugely, because honestly, it's still pretty decent for an album. Same with Dirty Computer, I still think it's a decent album. I wouldn't call either of these albums bad, but they certainly just don't hit the heights that I think they should have. Now, what makes this different to last year's disappointed list for me is that, sure, LCD Sound System, Gorillaz, Arcade Fire really did let me down, but with those artists, they're kind of established artists, and they're, you know, past their peaks. They had their greats in their careers, some amazing heights in their careers, and it's kind of okay at this point that these artists aren't putting out great music. Even the best artists of all time hit lulls in their career. You know, David Bowie wasn't hitting it out of the park with every album after album. He had some really low points in his career, and that's okay. But for Anderson .Paak, what makes this hit harder is that he's so early on in his career, and I just thought this was going to be the one that would be amazing from start to finish. I thought every track would just completely kill it. He had a great single earlier on in the year with Bubbling. I just thought this was going to be it. And maybe, you know what? Malibu just isn't as highly regarded for a lot of people as it is for me, but I would still say it's pretty highly regarded. It has its acclaim. It has a lot of people that love that album, and all of what made that album great from the first place just really got sucked out of Oxnard. And yeah, sure, there were some great tracks on Oxnard. Tints, Who Are You, Cheers definitely were some big highlights for me, but still, what made Malibu great was his oozing charisma, his oozing personality, his laid-back lifestyle. Everything was just so fun, you know what I mean? And that was just taken away from Oxnard. I still definitely think Dr. Dre watered down his sound in a somewhat kind of fashion, but even still, I definitely feel like this album could have given us a lot more than what it did. I'm gonna leave it there. I don't want to keep talking because I'll just get more sad thinking about albums that let me down. But there were a lot of greats this year anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. But some of these albums on this list were like album of the year contenders going into them. I was dead set sure that Denzel Curry, Janelle Monáe and Anderson .Paak would be like top 10 for the year, but they're not even going to be making my top 50, and it's just kind of a letdown really. Let me know your thoughts on these albums, if they let you down or if you think they're much better than what I'm giving them credit for, and let me know what disappointed you as well. More lists will be coming soon. Hope you enjoyed this video. Have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already. Goodbye.